They say when a baby is born, so is a mother. But while you are there to help your baby grow into the person he or she is meant to be, who is there to help you? Many women feel lost and alone when they become mothers, wondering, who am I now? Sometimes it feels like the transformation from woman to mother is as radical as a caterpillar's transformation into a butterfly. Did you know that inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar literally turns into goop before it rearranges itself into a butterfly? This podcast is about the goop, what soul transformation looks like as you transition from being a woman to a mom. Your baby's growth matters, but yours does too. You're not alone. I'm your host, Brittany Meng. Welcome to the Motherhood Metamorphosis.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Motherhood Metamorphosis. Today is a solo episode, so it's just me, your host, Brittany Meng. As I was thinking about this episode for March 2022, the only thing that was on my mind was 2 years from March 2020, and I wanted to have a reflection episode about motherhood and the pandemic. That's on my mind. I don't know if it's on your mind too, but everything right now is reminding me of what it was like 2 years ago, what it was like 3 years ago, and how much has changed and how much I've changed. And what do I do with that now? So I just want to welcome you in to listen, to reflect, and to just come along this journey of this solo episode today and think about your own life as I kind of reflect on mine. I've been struck so much lately about similarities between surviving and living through this pandemic and motherhood. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but I read this fascinating article just a week or so ago when I was preparing for this episode that I wanted to share with you, and it was called Our Brains Want the Story of the Pandemic to Be Something It Isn't by Joe Pinkster. And that title just jumped out to me because I love story. I'm a storyteller. I am a writer, and that title just resonated with me. We wanted this pandemic story to be something that it wasn't. It's dragged on. I mean, the article talked about how this was, if the pandemic was a movie, it would have been a flop. There was no rising arc of drama or conflict and then the falling resolution. It was just the grind, one thing after another. None of us could have anticipated how this pandemic has gone. None of us could have prepared for it. And even more significantly, this is a story that none of us would have written for ourselves. A quote that really stuck out from the article by Pinkster says, "People constantly hear tales of triumphing over adversity, but the pandemic story has withheld that positive resolution and refused to end, let alone end well." Another quote was, "The pandemic has produced, quote, an exhaustion born not only of the relentlessness of the pandemic, but the relentlessness of the ever-changing narratives that have accompanied it." Man, if that doesn't resonate with me, these narratives just don't resolve. They have bad endings or tragic endings or something that we can't even make sense of. And then finally, this last quote, "The pandemic has been this idea that we've been deprived of the life story we wanted to be living. It stresses us out because it implies a loss of authorship over our personal narrative." And I couldn't help but relate this to my motherhood story. All the people that I've interviewed, we have common themes throughout, but one of them is that our motherhood has looked different than we thought it would look. We couldn't have anticipated our child's needs. We couldn't have had anticipated our own needs. We couldn't have anticipated the pain that has come along with our motherhood story. So in relating this to the pandemic, I can think, wow, this space of transition, this space of hardship, we've been here before. Our motherhood narratives are filled with the unexpected, parts that we never would have chosen for ourselves or our children. We know about that shift. We know what happens when that shift occurs in our bodies, our hearts, our souls, our expectations, our jobs, our loves, and our priorities. We've been here before. This is the goop. This pandemic, 2 years later, this is the goop. our pre-pandemic lives have dissolved. They are dissolving. It's horrible and real and frightening and exhausting. We are being remade even as we resist the transformation. And I think that's why it can be so painful. I just want to say that again. We are being remade even as we resist the transformation. I think that's why this can be so painful. So I've been reflecting on that recently, and just the unique temptations just to swing from one extreme to the other in my own reflection on the story that the narrative of the pandemic has left me. So one swing to the extreme is just this bitterness that I feel. Why so much hardship? Why so much transition? Why was this pandemic so intense, especially on women? We can look at, there's been articles written about how women have carried us through the pandemic. Just mothers leaving their jobs, going home to stay with their kids, working from home, teachers who are primarily women in elementary schools or even through middle and high school, just grinding on. People who are in the helping professions, a lot of them are women. And so it seems that this pandemic has just pressed its thumb into women's hearts and minds and bodies so intensely. And that feels unfair. And I feel that so much. It's like, come on, universe, give us a break. Isn't motherhood enough without shouldering women with this Sisyphean burden of the pandemic too? There's so much transition, so much grief, so much isolation, so much anxiety. There's only so much we can bear before we break. But then I feel the pendulum shift. I feel it swing in the other direction. And I think, we're not broken. I'm not broken. You're not broken. We're flexible. The pandemic has made us these contortionists worthy of the most mind-blowing circus. The reason mothers have been able to carry this country during the pandemic is because motherhood is the training ground for flexibility. We've been in the goop before. We're forged in that fire, and we'll always rise from the ashes again and again and again. So we have pain and bitterness on one end, and we have this incredible, untouchable strength on the other. So the grief and hardship can feel crushing, and on the other hand, the strength is insurmountable. But both of these realities are true. But in our day-to-day lives, our lived out experience is usually somewhere in the middle. If you follow the Facebook page, which I hope you do, the Motherhood Metamorphosis podcast Facebook group, I have been putting up some questions for the last month about what your experience has been like through the pandemic. And as I read through all those responses and looked at your stories, a lot of words jumped out at me, similarities. And the words were tired, exhausted, lonely. And I'm like, yeah, that really resonates with me too. I also did a poll about things that the pandemic has significantly impacted. And there were about 15 results. But the top 5 were kids schooling, mental health, anxiety, vacations, and family gatherings. It kind of stripped us down to the everyday mundane grind, just in survival mode. And it affected our kids' school and our mental health and anxiety in huge, significant ways. One story that really stuck out to me was this one. My kids were 5, 3, and 3 when the pandemic started. My oldest was in pre-K. I'm a full-time PhD student with studying for comprehensive exams while taking a full course load, and all of a sudden my kids were home 24/7. It was so hard and exhausting, and I felt like I was failing at everything. And I have felt that way not only during the pandemic, but also during postpartum or those big transitions that happened in motherhood. Another mom wrote, "The pandemic has changed what I expected motherhood to be like. It has robbed me of a lot of community and added so many new layers of fear that I never dreamed of. And another mom wrote, losing in-person community was and still is painful. I know I'm still dealing with the loss of community, both through the pandemic and through a move. But I think that transitions in community also occur during motherhood. So again, I'm struck with like the similarities of transition and that I've been here before. Some other words stuck out to me too as I read through your responses. Grateful, thankful, resilience. And some phrases that stuck out also. The pandemic taught me that I can shrink our world and still maintain what matters most. That I can have value even when I'm not performing and completing. And that I've learned to better process my emotions and in response to my sons. Lots of processing going on. And I totally relate to all of those too. It has given me so much to be grateful for. My world has gotten smaller, but I'm still so grateful for the life that I have. Some beautiful memories that y'all shared. One mom wrote, we did a family sports day with all the boys, sack races, egg and spoon race, obstacle race, three-legged race, complete with a medal ceremony. It was in the first lockdown when we should have been on holiday, but it was sunny and I remember laughing together so much. Another mom remembered, 2020 summer was glorious. My kids played on the deck nearly every day. We had lots of picnics on the deck. We remember that sunshine and we remember like the hardship. And I think that we're left with memories of the good and of the grateful and of our thankfulness. But our bodies feel so tired now. And I'm wondering, who are we now? Who am I now? As a woman, as a mom, as a human being? And how do we honor our pain and our strength and this story that we would have never ever written for ourselves? How do we move forward from here? As I have reflected on this and thought about ways to explain my inner life in trying to make sense of the pandemic 2 years in, I was struck with the memory of visiting Pointe du Hoc with my kids in December of 2019. Pointe du Hoc is in France. It is the cliffs above the beaches of Normandy, so D-Day. And we took our 5 kids there on our vacation because we were living in England and we went over to France. And as we went to this memorial, I was anticipating a very solemn day. I wanted a time of reflection. I wanted to feel the emotions of visiting this intense memorial site. But when we got there and we saw all of these divots and craters in the earth where shells had hit, where people had dug trenches, there were concrete structures where they were gun outposts and for tanks, and the ground was just marked with war. But in all of those huge craters, I mean, they were craters that I didn't want my kids to fall into. They were deep, but they were all grassy. The grass had grown up. There weren't any flowers because it was December, but it was very grassy, and I thought, wow, there's growth here. But this land has been marked permanently by war. And I kind of wanted to soak all that in, but at the same time, my kids were bickering with each other. One of them fell down into one of a shallow hole and hurt his leg and was crying, and we ended up carrying him around. And there was just all of this noise and chaos, and there wasn't a lot of time for this like deep reflection that I wanted to have at this D-Day memorial. And I thought, wow, how apt is that as a metaphor for the pandemic? We have all of these craters the pandemic has wrought on us, like griefs and things that have been taken away from us, and just trauma. And we don't have time to reflect on them because our kids keep needing us constantly. We have the day-to-day. We have to take care of them, like physically, emotionally, mentally, and we have to take care of ourselves too. It's like the noise of real life drowns out any type of reflection that we might be able to take to soak everything in. So when I think about growth, and I think about motherhood, and I think about the pandemic, I know that motherhood has taught me that growth and transformation are still possible, even in the middle of chaos and meeting the needs of our children. But it takes observation and intention. And as much as I would have wanted to visit Pointe du Hoc, like by myself or with my husband so I could really take it in, I don't think that the experience was less because my kids were kind of chaotic during that time. It maybe wasn't ideal. It maybe wouldn't be what I would have wanted to take in this, World War II memorial. But I know that I was sharing life with them during that time. And I wouldn't have traded that. Like it was what it was supposed to be. So in taking that as a metaphor for the pandemic, I think that we can move through transitions and observe these wounds and know that transformation and growth is still possible even when we are trying to meet the needs of our kids and when there's chaos and bickering and people crying all around us. So take that to heart, if you will. The same is going to be true about us moving forward over the last 2 years, even if we're unsure that the pandemic is over yet. I think our brains want to tell a story of strength and resilience and overcoming, but our bodies and hearts are so tired. In his article, Pinkster writes, instead of grasping for a redemptive story to tell about the pandemic overall, we might be more at peace if we select a frame that's humble and realistic. For me, being humble and realistic about how much the pandemic has affected me and my kids looks like acknowledging the wounds the pandemic has inflicted and taking care that the sharp edges don't continue to wound. And man, this takes so much effort for me lately. So much introspection, so much cycling back and thinking, hey, why did I act that way? So I have a metaphor to share and I have a couple of stories to share. The metaphor is this. I saw a Facebook friend share a picture of holly leaves recently on her Facebook page. And if you've ever had holly as a decoration or a holly bush nearby, you know that holly is incredibly sharp. If you brush up against it, it can cut you. But what fascinated me about the picture, an article she shared, was that holly leaves aren't necessarily sharp. They are smooth, but it can develop different shapes of leaves and different prickles if animals start nibbling on them. So the holly bush actually develops this defense mechanism where it will say, hey, are you going to eat me, dear? I'm going to create really sharp spikes so that my leaves don't get eaten. And the holly can actually develop all different types of leaves. So near the top of the plant, the leaves might be completely smooth, and near the bottom, they might be really prickly, where the animals might have been munching on them. That really just struck me as just this really telling metaphor for going through trauma. And how as a defense mechanism, I know that I can develop these really sharp prickles that are keeping me safe, like they're a coping mechanism. But they're also prickles that can cut me and cut my loved ones and my kids if I'm not careful. I read another article from CBS News called Addressing the Pandemic's Mental Health Fallout. And a statistic that really stuck out to me was this. Quote, people after 9/11 or Hurricane Katrina experienced problems with mental health for at least another 7 to 10 years out. We're always hearing all the time, oh, kids are so resilient. And Daphne Torres Douglas, who is Vice President of Behavioral Health Services, says, resilience doesn't take away trauma. We still have to address the fact that our kids are hurting. And I think I'm just going to carry that phrase with me. Resilience doesn't erase trauma. Just like those prickles on the holly bush. I know that I've developed my own prickles through this. I've been shaped. I have craters, I have prickles, whatever metaphor you want to use. Like, I know that I've been changed by just the grind of the pandemic. But I want to acknowledge my trauma while also honoring my own resilience to keep moving forward. So here's a story of where my prickles came out and how I dealt with it. So my husband is gone right now for military training, and the last time he left was for his deployment during 2020. He actually left right after the pandemic started. So I was dealing with the pandemic. I was dealing with a 6-month deployment while living in a foreign country, and it was really intense. So when he left this time around, I had friends ask me, so how are you mentally preparing for this? And I'm like, well, kind of by not thinking about it. But when he left, a lot of those same feelings came rushing back, especially one day, about 3 days after he left, and all my kids were home for a snow day, and they had e-learning that day. So I was stuck in the house with 5 kids. It was icing outside. They were doing e-learning, and my husband was gone. And I started to have a very strong anxiety response as the day moved on. And I felt panicky. I was snapping. I was starting to yell at everyone. I felt like I just wanted to crawl out of my skin. And I knew I had to get what was inside out of my system. And a habit that I developed is, over the last 2 years, is saying, okay, I can't stew in what I'm feeling right now. I've got to get it out. So I wrote to 2 of my friends that went through the deployment pandemic thing together when I was in England, and I said, I'm really having a hard time today, and this is what I'm feeling. And they said, yeah, that makes total sense that you would feel that way. And I hadn't even fully grasped why I was responding the way I did. And when I talked to my husband, all the pieces kind of fell in together, that the anxiety that was present when he was deployed and during the initial pandemic was very much reminding me of 2 years later. And he was only gone for 6 weeks, but all the kids were home and we were stuck in the house, and I felt trapped. And I felt like I was going under. As I talked to my friends and my husband, I was able to work through those emotions, understand a little bit what I was feeling, and actually reflect on the fact that I can get through this day. And I felt a lot better after I talked to them. The next day, I felt a lot better. And I know that if I hadn't talked about how I was feeling, I wouldn't have connected all the dots to a pandemic anxiety response, like almost like a PTSD. I don't think I would have put all those pieces together. And I think I would have continued to just spiral down. Been yelling at my kids all evening. My emotions would have affected their emotions. And I think it would have gone really badly for that day and maybe the rest of the week. So I had to put some coping mechanisms into place. So for me, it was immediately trying to recognize my feelings and talking to somebody about it that day. For my kids, my little 7-year-old son, one of his favorite refrains right now is, I wish COVID wasn't real, or whatever he doesn't like. I wish having a cold wasn't real. I wish daddy being gone wasn't real. And I get that so much for him. I think that denial is something that we all lean into sometimes when we want things not to be real. But I try to gently push him and say, I know this is really hard. And when I think about his life, 2 years of his life, his little 7-year-old life has been spent in this pandemic. And it really has affected him mentally more than any of my other children, to the point where I am convinced that he has depression, and we are seeking counseling for him right now. And I've written about this in my blog, and I will share some articles that I've written about how much he has struggled. But I think about these stories that I would never have written for my kids. I never would have written one that says, my 5-year-old or 6-year-old or 7-year-old is struggling with depression. And that scares me, and it makes me feel all kinds of grief and hopelessness sometimes, to think this is part of my child's story. But I also know that I can honor that grief, and I can also lean into the fact that I'm still growing and he's still growing, and we're going to press through. So that idea that resilience doesn't erase trauma, so we're trying to address the trauma while also believing that we're going to overcome this has been a way for me to move forward. I also was talking to my 9-year-old just last week, and he has continued to wear his mask to school. And he actually had a big crying meltdown before school a couple weeks ago because he couldn't find his mask. And I told him, honey, your school said you don't have to wear a mask anymore. It's okay. Like, COVID numbers are down. And he's like, no. If I don't wear my mask, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get COVID. And he was just in this panic. That morning, I was just trying to help him calm down. And we did find the mask, and he went to school, and he was okay. But later I thought, wow, this is all he's known, or all he can really remember. And the mask feels like safety right now. And it's going to take him a while to be able to come out of that. And I talked to him about it, and I talked about being brave and how when he's ready, I hope he can step into bravery and realize that we don't have to wear the mask all the time anymore. And we've had some instances to practice that at the grocery store or at other things we've gone to, where he said, I'm really scared to go without my mask, but he's been able to be brave and actually enjoy himself while we went out. But he's still wearing his mask to school, so it's a give and take. But I know that it's going to take time for my kids to move forward with their trauma and heal from that. And so I'm just trying to acknowledge that that pain is real for them, while also acknowledging that it's real for myself. COVID was not a story I would have written for myself or my kids. And when I reflect on the last 2 years, like, I know that I'm different. One thing that has really struck me as my Facebook memories have come up was I made a lot of kind of funny memes at the very beginning of 2020, 2 years ago. March 2020, I was making these funny memes. And when I look at them, I know that we were wanting to laugh at the time, and a lot of people did, but I'm not laughing now. I think it's because I'm just cringing a little bit and saying like, oh, we thought it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it was not. It went far deeper and far darker than anyone could have imagined. And I'm not laughing anymore. I'm just kind of cringing. We know too much. We've lived through too much. So for me, I'm still in the goop. The metaphor that I'm in the cocoon. I'm being transformed. I'm dissolving. And who I was once is not who I'm becoming. But I know that there's transformation on the other side. I'm being remade, and it's painful and confusing. But I'm going to trust the process because I've been remade before. Motherhood has shown me how I can rise and be remade again and again, even through unexpected and painful stories, through soul-crushing transformations. So if your soul is tender and hurting and grieving right now, I hope you can reach down deep and say to yourself, I see you. I'm going to take care of you. I won't try to speed up your growth. Remember, we've been in the goop before. And then once you have had this tender conversation with yourself, grounding yourself in your feminine, mothering wisdom and intuition, extend that tenderness to others, like your kids, your spouse, your friends, and the world. The world is full of these sharp edges and craters, and we keep wounding ourselves. I think we're going to experience our wounding again and again as we stumble forward out of this. But what we need is the strength and wisdom of our collective motherhood to help us grow and thrive as we move forward. We've been in the goop before, and we came out of it. And this is just another transformation. Thank you for listening today. I really appreciate your time as I reflect on this, and I hope it's helped you reflect as well. Be good to yourself today, be kind, and keep moving forward, friends.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Motherhood Metamorphosis. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode. Next, tell your friends. Podcasts are a slow growth type of social media, so promo works best when it's from person to person. If you know another mom who's in the goop right now, send her a text of encouragement and the link to the episode that is speaking to your heart right now. If you have a story about your own matrescence, the physical, emotional, hormonal, and social transition that occurs when someone becomes a mother, please leave a comment below. I want this channel to be a place where women can build community about the challenges and joys of their own motherhood metamorphosis. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope it encouraged you and gave you some good food for thought. If you ever have any questions, comments, or you'd like to reach out to me personally, you can email me at brittanyameng@gmail.com.
People constantly hear tales of triumphing. People constantly hear tales of triumphing. People constantly hear tales of triumphing.